Irreverent, entertaining, cool. You're listening to LA Talk Radio.
You're listening to Remotely Unique with Mary Baca, only on LA Talk Radio.
Hi, this is Mary Baca, airing live from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Thank you all for joining me. I want to tell you a little bit about myself for those of you that are listening in for the first time. I'm a licensed therapist and also a holistic practitioner, specifically certified as a Reiki practitioner, applied kinesiologist, recently certified as a hypnotherapist. And most of the services I provide are provided here locally or physically in other states and cities. And thank God for technology. Most of the services I provide, I can also do so remotely through webinars and such, and telephone, and hence the name Remotely Unique, which is the name of my show. Today, the topic, actually the series for May is going to be on workplace issues, and the topic that I chose for today is on effective supervision, and it is a topic that I think is really, really important. I myself, really, since before I even got my bachelor's degree, started in some light supervisory capacity as a lead psychiatric technician in mental health hospitals that I worked in. And then forging forward, when I got my master's degree, I've been director in treatment facilities and therapeutic programs, including residential care for teen mothers and their children, and also violent males. In addition to that, one of the jobs I've held, because until probably about 10 years ago, I worked for other companies in addition to having my private practice. One of the jobs I held was as an employee assistance counselor for the United States Postal Service. And in that job capacity, I provided clinical supervision for counselors throughout the state of New Mexico that were on contract with the company I worked for and providing counseling services to United States Postal Service employees. Currently, I have a private practice called Odyssey Counseling Services. I have several counselors that are employed by my agency, and so I supervise them, of course, regularly. And then I also have a holistic practice called Resilience Integrative Services, and I work with a variety of practitioners who are on my team here in Albuquerque, Santa Fe. I have a team started in New Orleans, Dallas, Texas, and most recently, Los Angeles, California. In the last 30 years, I have seen hundreds of people who have come in to see me about workplace issues. Work is a big, big deal for people. I mean, think about it. You know, we spend a good majority of our time in the workplace. And really, supervisors set the tone for how things are going to go in that workspace. I believe that in every avenue that I work and live, I'm given the opportunity to grow and heal and change. It's really one of my passions to promote the same for anyone that I interact with, including the counselors that work for me. I've created even a career development program for new counselors or individuals who have not yet graduated and want to start receiving supervision in the way of classes and continuing education programming for them. So I want to get ready now to bring on my guest, and I want to say that when I read an article she wrote in preparation for today, well, I think she had written it before, but she sent it to me to take a look at. It was like a breath of fresh air. Because I think a lot of times what you're going to hear her talk about, and I'll tell you who her is in a minute, but what you're going to hear her talk about are some beliefs and approaches that unfortunately you don't find a lot of supervisors that adopt those approaches and beliefs and methods of carrying out their job. And so when I read an article that Dr. Julia Bain had sent me in preparation for today, it was a breath of fresh air because it became clear to me very quickly that her and I, I'm sure we share a lot of things in common, but one of the things is just how important it is to treat people with kindness and compassion, no matter where you're dealing with people, including in the workplace as a supervisor. So let me tell you who Dr. Julia Bain is. She is a licensed professional clinical counselor. She's nationally certified as a counselor, and she also has a certification as an employee assistance professional. Dr. Bain has been the EAP, Employee Assistance Program Manager for the City of Albuquerque for nearly 25 years. Dr. Bain has a monthly television program on Government Channel 16 called Mind, Body, and Spirit, where she has interviewed over 100 professionals in the community, including the local mayor, Richard Berry. The focus of her show is to encourage the audience to explore how to develop strategies, growing strength and stamina to improve self, others, and local organizations. Julia was interviewed by the District Attorney Carrie Brandenburg on KKOB radio station 770 as the featured guest, talking about the variety of issues that impact relationships. Dr. Bain addressed the Employee Assistance Professionals Association 2014 World Conference and presented Imagine a Workplace Without Bullies. Julia has served as a board member for the New Mexico Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and she also was on the board of directors for the Domestic Violence Resource Center. Julia was interviewed by the Albuquerque Journal regarding exercising at work, and another article about her experience as singer in the Sweet Adelines choral group. She's been active for many years in the local chapter of the Employee Assistance Professionals Association, serving as secretary, treasurer, vice president, and president, providing leadership to the employee assistance professionals serving businesses across the state of New Mexico. Julia is currently serving on the EAPA International Nominating Committee, working with employee assistance programs across the globe to assist in the selection process of the new EAPA Board of Directors, and as a result of her doctoral dissertation, Collection and Analysis of Baseline Epidemiological Violence Data Among City of Albuquerque Workforce, 1997, she subsequently went on to write the City of Albuquerque's Violence Prevention and Domestic Violence Policies. Most recently, her writing was published in the May 2015 issue of the Employee Assistance Report in the article she titled, Not Here, Employees Need Your Help to Confront Bullies. Dr. Bain counsels and consults with the city workforce on a daily basis, and she trains approximately 1,500 employees a year regarding violence prevention, stress management, anger management, supervisor development, how to utilize the Employee Assistance Program, team building, conflict resolution, and other topics by request. Dr. Bain, welcome to today's show.
Thank you, Mary Baca. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad that you could join us. And I guess one of the first questions I have is because I know when we talked about, there's so many things you could have talked about today. And so when we were talking about, what should we make the topic? And we both loved the topic at hand, effective supervision. What interests you about that topic?
Well, I think there's really nothing more important than employee health, no matter what your organization is. And part of good health is being supervised by someone who knows what they're doing. And unfortunately, I think you and I probably, through the course of our careers, have had supervisors that weren't very good and didn't have the personality to effectively lead and be in charge and take care of their work group. And so I feel passionate about helping people become a good supervisor because it's so important.
Right. It is. Well, it's like the parent, of an organization, right? Maybe the director's the higher person, but supervisors play a really important role for sure.
Absolutely.
Why is it important to know and value what, for a supervisor to know and value what they enjoy about being a supervisor?
Well, I think it's important to have it in the forefront of your mind. I'm doing this because I value taking care of people. It means something to me. It's important. And for someone who is a supervisor to understand what they enjoy about it reminds them that even when the hard times come, even when there's conflict within the work group, even when you have an employee that is difficult to supervise, to remind yourself, I am doing this because it's part of my legacy in terms of my career, in terms of my life, in terms of who I am. This is part of my legacy, and I'm choosing to be a supervisor. And sometimes I think we need to be reminded of that because sometimes it gets pretty tough.
Right, it does. And, I guess one of the things that comes to my mind when you're talking about that is I think that a lot of times when people choose to become a supervisor, they may not even be really clear about why they're making the choice to do that. Or sometimes it might be money, money being a motivator, prestige being another motivator, power. And those are not the reason, right, to become a supervisor.
Well, for some people, that's why they choose to become a supervisor. That's certainly not the person I want to work for.
Right. Absolutely. Well, and what do you think are some good qualities for a person who is going to be an effective supervisor? What are some good qualities or traits that they should have?
Well, I think it's really important to be approachable, to have the kind of personality where people feel safe in your presence and comfortable with you. And the way you develop that type of presence is by being consistent, by being somebody that other people want to be around. So when you're an approachable supervisor, people are willing to go to you with problems about attendance, performance, behavior, the work group, any concerns they have in terms of safety. They will be your eyes and ears because this is supervisor. You can't be everywhere, right?
Right.
So being approachable, and then that being said, once somebody does approach you, to be compassionate and remember that everybody has at least one personal problem. I guarantee it. And to remember that everybody has at least one problem, and everyone is also a survivor of some sort of trauma. We've all been traumatized in our lives more than once. And so to remember that and feel compassion and empathy for the people who work for you, they're not always going to have a great day because life happens and they have a lot on their plate.
Well, that's so true. And I always tell people that I wish that once we walk through our work door, we could really, in fact, leave our personal selves at home. But that's not realistic. That's not really how it works.
No. And in a way, Mary, it's really it's an opportunity to continue to create the legacy that you're leaving behind after you're gone, whether you're gone from that particular workplace or whether you are gone in terms of you have died. When you're at work, you have an opportunity to help people, to make the operation better, to make your organization stronger and more productive. And you just have an opportunity to do well by everyone when you're there. And I think if you carry that kind of value in your heart and it's part of your focus, everybody's going to win because you are there.
That's a great way to look at it. That is such a positive attitude. It's wonderful. That's a really great way to look at it. And I think to really, one of the things that I like about that approach too is, so you do it, everything you do then as a supervisor is with purpose and intention, If you start off with that goal that you just mentioned, to leave a legacy and to really make a mark and make an impression, then everything that you do just kind of comes from that, is born from that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What?
And just, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say the practice, for example, of when you're being fully present with your employees, when you're really there, when you're not thinking about what you had for dinner last night, when you're not thinking about what you're going to pick up at the hardware store on the way home. You are really right there with them, listening to every word like it is the most important conversation you have ever had. When you give somebody that gift, sometimes that is the best listening someone has ever experienced in their lives. And when you think about it, and Mary, as a clinician as well as I do, that when you have that openness to what somebody has to say, you could potentially save a life. Somebody might say to you, I've been so depressed, I don't know how I can go on. But no one's going to say that to you if you are not approachable and if you are not fully present when you are with them.
Well, that's absolutely right. And the people that I have had come in over the years that talk about workplace issues, a lot of times it is because they haven't been treated like that. And this is their description. There's always two sides to every story, but their perception is that, and it is really hurtful for people. Like, a lot of times people feel rejected in the workplace because they don't feel paid attention to. And, I just want to give you some acknowledgement when you talked about that, is that when the last time that Tom Henderson, a counselor that works for me, and I went to meet with you, that is something that stood out about our meeting. And I want you to know that is just what you just said. I walked away from that noticing that you treated us like we were all you had, like we had your full attention. And you're a busy lady. I know this. But, I really walked away feeling that and thought about it after. I thought, wow, I really felt like you paid attention to us and you were very present and cared about what we were talking about. And so I want to say that I can, you stand behind what you just said, that you don't just talk the talk, but that you walk the walk, and that I noticed that myself.
Well, thank you, Mary.
Yeah, absolutely. And what is a supervisor responsible for, regardless of the type of work? Because, from depending on the culture, the work culture and situation, you're going to have some differences. But there are certain things that, regardless of the type of work, a supervisor is responsible for. What would you say those things are?
I'm going to answer your question, but first I want to thank you for that wonderful compliment you just gave me. And the reason why I was listening and so fully present with you is because I respect you. I have a lot of respect for you. I think you're very important to our community. I think you help a lot of people. I think your heart is in the right place. And it's easy to be fully present when I'm with somebody like you. So I just wanted to give that back to you.
That's awesome.
I mean it most sincerely. So regardless of the type of work, a supervisor is responsible for monitoring an employee's attendance, their performance, their behavior, and their safety. And it doesn't really matter what the job is, where you work or what you do, what your function is. Every supervisor is responsible for those four things: attendance, performance, behavior, and safety.
Yes. I hadn't thought about safety, but that is so true. And again, especially in some work cultures, more than others, I just did this series back in March with first responders, and I do a lot of work with first responders. And so, so of course, in a setting like that, safety, is really paramount and very present all the time.
Yeah.
So, yeah. can you talk a little bit about, for those people who may not be aware of what an employee assistance program is? I mean, I think it is such a vital resource for supervisors and employees, but I know that when I'm talking to people about EAPs, a lot of times people have never even heard what that is.
Unfortunately, that's true.
I know.
Well, and at the city, I'm part of the risk management division. And the reason that is because the city and a lot of other organizations sees an employee assistance program as a strategy for loss prevention. And the capital is the human beings. We don't want to lose any human beings through death, through dismemberment. We don't want anybody to lose a finger, an arm, a foot, an eye. And the reason why it makes so much sense to me that I am part of risk management is that a distracted employee, if they're worried about their teenage daughter that ran off 2 nights ago, and they're thinking about that, they could lose a hand, or they could get in a car accident because they're not concentrating and focusing on safety and their work and doing that in a way that does not cause harm. So EAP is also a strategy for harm reduction in terms of the entire workforce.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if somebody is not present, bad things can happen. What does an employee assistance counselor or an employee assistance professional do? How does an EAP work?
Well, I describe it as the emergency room of counseling. That's how I manage the EAP for the city. And what I mean by that, Mary, is if somebody needs to see a counselor today, we will help that person today. It's not calling a number on the back of your insurance card and hopefully getting in to see a counselor in 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. We help people immediately because crisis intervention is an integral part of employee assistance program work. And so a supervisor walks into an employee's office and she's sobbing at her desk. Or an employee goes into a supervisor's office and says, I was drunk all weekend and my wife told me if I don't clean it up, she's leaving. I can't work. I don't know what to do. We help employees and supervisors that day. And so we do a lot of crisis intervention. And unfortunately, sometimes we do have some fatalities. Sometimes we have employees who are involved in other people that die on city property, or a coworker, has a heart attack and dies in their chair, or somebody gets run over. I mean, this is a big operation. We have 6,500 employees, and we're taking care of a city of over 500,000 people.
Right,
and so accidents are going to happen. And so an employee assistance program is ready to be ready for anything, whether it's work-related or personal. If you are in a crisis and you are having an emergency, we will take care of you today.
Right. And
yeah.
I think that is synonymous with what an effective supervisor should be ready for too. That, you're not just dealing with the person's person's work behavior, like you're dealing with the whole person. And so, and the reason why I'm wanting you to talk about what an EAP is because it's a wonderful resource for managers and supervisors to use that I think oftentimes is underutilized.
Mm-hmm. I do too. I think people forget that it's a tool in your toolbox, although not every organization is fortunate enough to have an EAP.
Right. I know this to be true. One of the things too, because I get told this all the time, and I know from having been an EAP counselor in the past that this is false, and I tell people, but is the myth that, what you share with an EAP counselor is not confidential. I mean, because it is, other than, the typical things. If you're a risk to yourself or others, a risk of harming yourself or others, if you talk about a child or a vulnerable elderly adult that's being abused or neglected, things like that have to be reported. But that, a lot of times people think that if you talk to an EAP counselor, that it's going to get back to your employer of what you talked to them about. And that's just not accurate.
That is correct. We follow HIPAA law. We follow federal confidentiality law like any other counselor that has a license. I have a license. You're an LPCC. I'm an LPCC as well. And that, along with that license, comes a lot of responsibility in terms of decision-making skills and judgment calls in keeping individuals safe and keeping the community safe.
Right.
So let's say as an EAP or even you as a private clinician, let's say you had a employee walk into your office, regardless of where they work, and they come in for their counseling session with you, and when they leave your office, they're going to climb up inside of an 18-wheeler and drive off. Well, while they're in your office, Mary, they're actively psychotic. They're hearing auditory hallucinations telling them to drive off the road and into the Phoenix station. And they really wish that voice would stop because they have to go back to work. Now, you as a professional counselor, you would have to call the police.
Right, absolutely.
You'd have to call 911 to protect the community. So we have a duty to warn if someone is violent, if someone threatens to hurt other people. We have a duty to warn those people. We have to call them on the phone and say, this individual told me that they have every intent to kill you.
Right.
So there are certain, profound and dramatic situations. And like you said, if an elderly person is being abused or a child is being abused, those types of situations where people don't have a voice and can't speak for themselves and can't protect themselves, we have a duty to protect them.
Right. I know one time this was many years ago, but I had a client show up to his session, and he was intoxicated. And I told him, we can't have session. Like, there's no point, right? And two,
right.
you can't drive. Like, I need to call somebody to come and get you. He was argumentative, and I ended up having to call the police because he just was not going to have it. Like, he was just not having that. But, at that point, if you think about it, a car is a weapon, and he was going to get behind the wheel. And so that's just illegal and unethical on so many levels. So I lost a client. I mean, he never came back, but, at least he was alive. So,
Right. Right. And your counseling license is not only a legal contract that you have with the state of New Mexico, it's also a ethical and moral, badge that you wear every day.
Right. And, that involves making decisions and judgment calls all the time. Mm-hmm. So I have a question, and I think that this moves into territory that a lot of times I think supervisors, and again, depending on the person, right? It's not the job that makes the person, it's the person that makes the job. But what issues in themselves should an effective supervisor be aware of? So, we all have issues, going back to what you said at some point, which I think is so true. We all have trauma issues. We all have issues. I've never met a person that doesn't have issues. So what issues should a person be aware of in themselves that would impact their ability to be an effective supervisor?
That's a very good question. And what's interesting about that question is it requires the person to look inside themselves and have awareness and insight and value how they affect other people. So that being said, typically the person who really has no business being a supervisor is not going to go there. They're usually, somebody who has the personality that does not make for an effective supervisor is usually somebody who is, I don't know, immature, selfish, avoids conflicts,
Right.
has a tendency to be kind of a negative person, and not the kind of person who values treating other people well and doing right by employees in the organization, not to mention themselves. So it's kind of a catch-22 question, Mary. It's a very, very good question, but the catch-22 is, unfortunately, is supervisors who should look at themselves, and you always have to watch out for that word because there really is no should. You either do or you don't. But people who sometimes have the responsibility of supervising other people don't have the willingness or the value or the insight to look at themselves and say, I really need to change this about myself because I'm a pretty selfish person. People who are selfish don't ask themselves that question.
Right. But one of the characteristics that I see a lot is conflict avoidance. And so if somebody's a conflict avoider and they have that pattern behavior, like they should not be a supervisor. Because, if you can't handle confronting issues, then you shouldn't be in a supervisor capacity because that's just a normal thing that you're going to have to do day in, day out. And when I say the word confrontation, I don't even mean it in a negative way. It's interesting when you say the word confrontation, a lot of people take that to mean have a negative connotation. I mean it in a positive way. It's good to confront issues. It's good to, hey, let's get this out on the table. This is what I'm picking up from you. Is this accurate? I don't want to misinterpret somebody's behavior. And, but that's what I mean by confrontation. But there are those people that have that as an issue, and that is one personality characteristic that I think really works against a person being able to be effective as a supervisor.
I agree. I totally agree. However, if you really want to become a supervisor and you know that you're kind of a borderline introvert and you'd rather pull your hair out than actually have a conflict, it can be developed. It's something that you can work on, you can get better at, and the more assertive you are at work, the more assertive you can be wherever you are. And assertiveness is saying, putting it out there that I have all the power here. And it doesn't matter where you are. You always have all the power. You're always in charge of who you are in your life. And so to any individual who is listening and says, well, maybe I can't be a supervisor because I'm not very good at conflict, it's okay. You can develop that. You can get better at it.
You know what? And I'm really glad you said that because absolutely that's true. And, if I don't believe that people could change, well, I should just go home. That's what I do for a living, right? Is help people identify the things they want to change and then seeing them through the process to be able to do that. So absolutely. I'm so glad you said that because sometimes I have seen people have that issue, but take on a supervisor management role and just grow. And it's so amazing to witness that,
Yes.
So, yeah,
absolutely.
I agree for sure.
And it pays off in every relationship you're in.
Yes, it does. Because you're right. Then it carries over into personal life and, and that's a good quality to have is to be assertive. So in the unfortunate case of having to take disciplinary action, what do you think is a good approach? And I know that's a broad question because there's all kinds of variables in there depending on the who, what, where, when, and why. But, give me some idea of what you think.
Well, once again, to remind the audience, it's Mary that has the license in counseling, and I have a license in counseling. Just because you're a supervisor does not give you the capacity or willingness to diagnose someone's problem.
Right.
So I want to caution you from diagnosing and figuring out what kind of advice to give somebody so that next time maybe they don't fail at their employment. I think that, once again, compassion, empathy, giving people encouragement in terms of going out there and getting some advice from resources in the community, counselors, church, friendships, different resources that they have to develop insight and become stronger and maybe revisit their occupational goals and take a look at what went wrong here. But I really want to caution any supervisor from giving anybody advice once termination has been decided and is done. I think one of the biggest responsibilities the supervisor has is to make sure the person isn't angry or violent regarding the termination, because if that is the case, then, might have to call out security, APD, circle the wagons in terms of, I think we have a problem here. This person looks like they may be posing a threat. So the supervisor has the responsibility to keep everybody safe. And if someone is going ballistic or someone is being unreasonable with the choice of the organization to terminate, then that supervisor needs to take action to make sure everyone is safe and that person does not come back on the property.
Right. And
at a minimum.
Sometimes that can be delayed. I remember one year I had to go and do a CISD in Las Vegas, Nevada, because a guy had gone through arbitration with the union for a whole year, lost the arbitration, and showed up to the station and shot himself and several people, including the labor relations guy. So,
what a shame.
It was horrible. And so, the responsibilities of a supervisor are tough. There's a lot of things that you can't even just think that you're doing now, but that things like that, like ensuring safety, going back to one of the things you said, that have to be done. It's almost like you have to have the foresight when you terminate somebody to say, okay, could this potentially be a problem in the future? Because if you know your employees well, you kind of can gauge, really. But one of the other things is, I think it's always interesting. There's such fine lines in supervision, supervisory roles. And what I mean by that is, you want to show that you're genuinely concerned for your employee, and you want to hopefully make disciplinary action be a positive thing, like in terms of, conveying that you want to help that person improve their behavior, that really you want to retain them as an employee, that you value what they're doing, and, accentuate the positive about them and try to help them build upon the positive. But sometimes there's that fine line too, where you don't want them to sit there and talk to you like they would a counselor because of the legal issues involved administratively, So it's an interesting fine line, and you have to be able to tell, going back to the point you made about being sure not to diagnose, you really do have to be knowledgeable about or get trained in, or both, right? Because we're always in a learning process. But so that you don't get the organization where you're supervising in trouble,
Absolutely. And violence prevention, if any supervisor could avail themselves to that, it's a wonderful skill to have, and it really plays in here when you're having to let somebody go and you've got red flags going up. I mean, it's so important to trust your gut. If you think someone may become violent, you need to trust your gut and believe that, because what a lot of times people do, Mary, is they'll minimize it, and they'll say, oh, well, he's just upset because he was just fired. He didn't mean it when he looked over his shoulder and said, I'm coming back and I'm taking you out.
Right.
To take those types of threats, that's a veiled verbal threat. Sometimes it's more direct, like I'm going to come back and I'm going to kill you. You're going to pay. You're going to pay for this. that is a veiled verbal threat as well. So learning how to recognize the signs of when someone might become potentially violent, I think, is extremely important for any supervisor.
Well, right. And who to talk to, like to remember as a supervisor, you're not in it alone. You have a higher up in command to go to, or you have the employee assistance program, or you have, know what your options are in terms of support and resources, because it's not always going to be the case where you can make those determinations alone. And that's okay. Like, that doesn't mean that you're not effective at what you do. It means that you want to just be doubly sure, and I agree. You can never take a threat. You can never just be idle in terms of even passive aggressive threats. And a lot of times people, just in general, right, I think in our society, are so afraid to take action and do something. But, a lot of times when you do take action and do something, that's what stops the situation from escalating. So in terms of another personality characteristic of an effective supervisor, somebody who's willing to take action, even if the action is to go and talk to their superior, about the situation, even if that's the action.
Right. And just like when somebody threatens suicide, when somebody says, "I'm done with my life, I'm finished, I'm tired, I'm over, I don't want to live anymore," how you're supposed to believe somebody when they say that. The same is true for any kind of homicidal ideation. When somebody says, "I'm really angry, I'm going to kill him, I want to hurt her, I want to get back at this place," you're supposed to believe that too.
Right.
Because people who are mentally stable don't talk that way.
Right.
You don't have to have a license to know that, right?
No. And the other thing is, you never know what that person's going through at home.
Right.
Work is just, maybe they're not mentioning anything at work, but you're right. If a person talks like that or makes any kind of threat, that person's already not stable. And so there's a good likelihood that things are going on at home, whether it's home that's causing the instability, or maybe the instability is causing problems at home. But you can never, guess at what that person's reaction is going to be when you terminate somebody. And so that's even more reason to do it in as compassionate a way as you can. When I've had to terminate people, I really try to have somebody leave the office with their integrity intact, and not humiliate them through the process, and really answer whatever questions I can about why that happened, even though, there shouldn't be any question, right? Because there should have been a corrective disciplinary process where there should be no blanks, right? But, sometimes people do still have questions. They're shocked, even though they probably shouldn't be. And I've always tried to just make sure that they're as stable of a place as possible when they leave my office after being terminated, and to allow them to go through that process with as much dignity as possible, because it's such a difficult situation already.
Exactly. And Mike, you also made a very good point just a few minutes ago, Mary, when you said the supervisor, needs to remember, ask for assistance, bounce it off somebody, go to your supervisor or to a coworker and say, "When I was in the termination meeting with Albert, he said this to me, and I don't feel comfortable with it. What do you think about that?" And bounce it off people. And one of the things I say at New Employee Orientation, Mary, is when I'm talking about the Employee Assistance Program and how important it is to utilize it when you need assistance, I say the strongest, bravest warriors across every land since the beginning of time have had the ability to say two words out loud. And those two words are, "Help me. Help me. I can't do this by myself. Nobody can." So whether you're a supervisor or an employee, there is no shame in realizing this is part of what being a human being is about. We live collectively. We don't live all by ourselves in a cave.
Right. Well, and I think sometimes people are afraid to lose face. They're afraid somebody's going to look down on them. And, a good supervisor will not treat an employee like any question is stupid, or they're incompetent if they're not picking up on something. I mean, an effective supervisor will allow a person, the room and flexibility, like you said earlier, to be approachable,
And it takes courage to ask for help, whether it's the supervisor who just lets somebody go and they're feeling a little nervousness in their gut because when the person walked out, it felt kind of threatening, or whether it's you, the employee, who is doing your best and you just feel like you're running around in circles, or you feel like you're a hamster on a wheel and you just can't quite get ahead. It takes courage and bravery to reach out and say to somebody, I need some help.
Right. There's nothing wrong at all with that. In fact, it's admirable, I think.
It is.
And that's what you're saying.
Admirable.
Yeah. So in closing, is there anything else you would add or say, or that you think our listeners should know about either being an effective supervisor, or if they have a supervisor that's not effective? Because unfortunately, there are those supervisors that can be anywhere from inadequate to toxic.
Right. Well, first of all, I want to thank you very, very much for having me on your show. It's been a lot of fun talking to you. I hope we can do it again sometime.
Yeah,
this has been awesome. So thank you for having me on your program. I wanted to say a quote from William McPhee for supervisors. And the quote is, "Doing what's right is no guarantee against misfortune." So you can be the most stellar, incredible supervisor the world has ever seen, and you are still going to have people who are resistant, stubborn, unwilling to change, and some people are just not going to make it, and it's not your fault. So I wanted to put that out there.
I'm glad you said that. And along with that is, you have to be okay with some people not liking you when you're a supervisor, because that's a reality, right? Not everybody's going to like you 100% of the time in life. That's just not possible. And so the workplace is the same thing. You might have people that get irritated with you, and that has to be okay, But
that being said, you can still be likable. You can still be cheerful and friendly and kind. And you cannot control how other people react to you, because the only thing we have control over in this life is what we think.
Right, absolutely. And that is a powerful thing in itself, what we think.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, it's been so awesome to talk to you, and I absolutely will have to have you back on the show for sure.
Oh, This has been really fun, Mary. Thank you so much.
It's endless, some of the things that we can talk about for sure, even non-workplace issues. I'm sure we'll have to chat and come up with some topics. I want everybody, to let you know that the show is now available on iTunes under the podcast section. You can search for Remotely Unique and subscribe to listen to the show every week, or download past episodes. The show now is also available on Stitcher.com for iPhone, Android, and other devices. And you have a great week, and we will talk to you next Monday. Thank you.
You're listening to Remotely Unique with Mary Baca, only on LA Talk Radio.